Hello and welcome to Reading Little Blue Books Aloud. We are currently reading The Real Thomas A Edison, book number 1411 of the Little Blue Book series. And the title is deceiving. We're no longer talking about Thomas Edison. We're now on Thoreau. And this is part 6, left off at page 55, and we'll start from there. Recognized need of a state. Clearly then, Thoreau was not lost in a transcendental mist when he enunciated his ideas on civil disobedience. He scrupulously recognized the need of a state, even of politics. But he did not stop there. He did not go on either, as is usually done, and used these admissions or excuses as excuses for justifying the maintenance of the state by the ruthless suppression of dissenting individuals and minorities. On the contrary, he used his social contract idea to justify the resignation from the state of dissenting individuals and minorities. He considered those who blindly submitted to the state out of mere expediency whether they judged it right or wrong as of the same sort of worth only as horses and dogs. All of his ideas on the subject developed out of his own incarnation in Concord jail in 1845 as a result of his failure to pay taxes. He refused on the grounds that he disapproved of the Mexican War, and he could not trace out the destination of his dollars and see whether they were used for building roads or schools, which he was willing to support, or guns, which he would not help buy. When he emerged from the jail, the taxes paid by a friend, he saw how silly the state was in fearing the secession of even a single individual. And he also saw that the power of the state is not superior wit or honesty, but superior physical strength. The state is based on force. This is the conclusion of Oppenheimer and Lowe. Recognizing this, he could clearly see that all who acted on his principles, heroes, patriots, martyrs, reformers in the great sense and men, and judge the state by their own ideas of what was right and wrong, would be accounted enemies of the state. The fact that the state maintained itself by force, by putting dissenters in jail, or by confiscating their property, did not lessen the importance of the necessity of succession when the state was wrong. It only increased the risks. And really, it was the state that was made ridiculous by shutting up dissenters in jail, and not the dissenters. That doesn't make sense. Let's read that again. And really, it was the state that was made ridiculous by shutting up dissenters in jail, and not the dissenters. For Thoreau saw, when he emerged from Concord jail, I saw that the state was half-witted, that it was as timid as a lone woman with the silver spoons, and that it did not know its friends from its foes, and I lost all my remaining respect for it and pitied it. He also believed that only on rare occasions, like revolutions, would the dissenters be really powerful enough to upset the state, or rather the government, which temporarily figured the state to the world. Thoreau, like Emerson, had small respect for the masses, and was more impressed by their inertia than their mobility. There is but little virtue in the action of masses of men, he said, when commenting on the fact that the opinions of the dissenters were sometimes ratified by a democratic majority in the course of time. Democracy appeared to have a tyranny like all other forms of government that had been tried in the world. Suspicion of the masses. This suspicion of the masses is also reflected in his economics. He imagined that God, not Edward G. God, but God, as he remarked, laughed at the fences men erected to mark off the pieces of the earth they claimed to own. The highest law gives a thing to him who can use it, but Thoreau had little interest in property as we think of it. He was more concerned about the satisfaction of our wants and needs, believing, like Ruskin did later, that life was an expensive commodity. He found himself at variance with the budding industrialism which acted on the principle that life was cheap. He could not bring himself to exploit these pages are hard to turn sometimes. Come on. He could not bring himself to exploit others for his own benefit, for such a course cheapened their lives and his too. He could not exploit himself, for that cheapened his own life. He therefore labored only enough to supply his needs, and to cut his needs to an absolute minimum, avoiding all conspicuous waste, and evaluated his life by the amount of leisure he was able to obtain. Not leisure for idleness, as is well known, but for cultural activity and thought. He wanted to ride on no man's back. Once he visited a pail factory. You come away from the great factory saddened, as if the chief end of man were to make pails. But in the case of the countryman, who makes a few by hand, rainy days, the relative importance of human life and of pails is preserved. But this betrays a narrowness of perception and can only be explained by his inability to see the larger utility of social activities. It has direct relation to his contempt for gregariousness. What men call social virtues, good fellowship, is commonly but the virtue of pigs in a litter, which lie close together to keep each other warm. It brings men together in crowds and mobs, in bar rooms and elsewhere, but it does not deserve the name of virtue. And as illustrative of his hostility to cooperation, there is the following. Talking with Bellow this evening, October 19, 1855, about Fourierism and communities, I said that I suspected any enterprise in which two were engaged together, as Emerson saw, his contempt for the church was part and parcel of the same hostility. The same isolation which belonged to his original thinking and living detached him from the social religious forms. Was an individualist. Thoreau, then, if an anarchist at all, was an individualist anarchist. He was incapable of forming a positive social ideal that would make possible some sort of civilized life. His incapability was related to the root defect in his personality, following Mark Van Doren's analysis. His lack of expansion on the emotional level. He never solved the problem of social living. His type of anarchism was a step on the road to Max Stirner and the ego and his own. Dr. Vernon Parrington, in Main Currents in American Thought, Volume 2, page 405, points out that there is nothing in civil disobedience that is not in William Goodwin's Inquiry Concerning Political Justice. There is no evidence that Thoreau ever read Goodwin. But it is interesting to note that Prince Kropotkin says Goodwin was the first to formulate the political and economical conceptions of anarchism, even though he did not give that name to the ideas developed in his remarkable book. Everyone knows that Goodwin so far temporized with the state he despised as to accept a position in the government which represented it. Thoreau never went so far in compromise. As we have seen, he recognized the necessity of the state and government and politics. Furthermore, he candidly announced that I will cheerfully obey those who know and can be better than I, and in many things even those who neither know nor can do so well. But nevertheless the state can have no pure right over my person and property, but what I concede it to. Thoreau reserved the right to stand inside or outside the state as he chose. I please myself with imagining a state at last which can afford to be just to all men, and to treat the individual with respect as a neighbor, which even would not think it inconsistent with its own repose if a few were to live aloof from it, not meddling with it, nor embraced by it, who fulfilled all the duties of neighbors and fellow men. Such a state would prepare the way for a still more perfect and glorious state. Wherein his anarchism differs. Comparing Thoreau's ideas with the definition of anarchism quoted above, we see that he differs from them on 2 points. 1. He concedes the right of the state to exist as a social expedient. He wished for its abolition, but was only prepared actively to resist it when it intruded upon his own particular way of living. And 2. He formulated no scheme for organizing society once the state had disappeared. His opposition to the state, like that of all anarchists, arose chiefly out of the fact that it interfered with the idea he sought, unlimited opportunity for the expansion of the individual personality. It is clear that Emerson sized up the matter correctly when he noted that Thoreau stood almost for abolition of government. Thoreau was almost an anarchist. The state made no mistake in recognizing him as an enemy and shutting him up, however briefly, in jail. Thoreau said that he came into this world not chiefly to make this a good place to live in, but to live in it, be it good or bad. Nevertheless, he ceaselessly sought how best to live in the world as he found it. Those who become excited by his plain speaking about the present economic and social organization are merely timid souls with a vested interest in the status quo, who do not care for what Thoreau sought, but for what he found along the way. And that is the end of book 1411, entitled The Real Thomas A. Edison by A.L. Shands. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe, please.